Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mindfuel, where we are making mental fitness accessible to endurance athletes so you can train your brain as consciously as you train your body. I'm Laura, the founder, and today, very happy to welcome psychotherapist, mental performance coach, and running and triathlon coach, Brant Stachel, to Mindfuel. Brant, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. This is really fun. It kind of combines all my worlds. So I'm excited to see where we get to with it.
It does. Brant and I were introduced by a mutual contact, and the first call that we had, it was an immediate connection and a lot of back and forth. So I think this conversation will certainly take us interesting places and be really beneficial for all of you. So, Brant, we start every conversation here asking our guests about who you are. So, said another way, how would a friend describe you?
Yeah, I'm probably the guy who never gave up the dream about running and all that stuff. So I started liking it at an early age and just everything I do is around running and sports and athletes and such. So they'd probably describe me as that. Uh, Probably the guy who's always willing to show up for you too. So anytime somebody needs something, I think that's why I got into the helper professions. But I don't ask that question very often, and I've never been asked it. So I think that would be an appropriate answer.
Well, we like to ask that question because so much of what we focus on is on what we do, including are we athletes? What are we professionally? So I think it's really important we remember that it's not what we do that defines us. It's really who we are. I say you've already started to mention sport. Why don't you dive into that a little bit more and tell us about your relationship with endurance athletics?
Yeah, I think I've come at it from friggin' every perspective you could possibly think of. So I started as a runner late in high school after being a great size for basketball in grade 8, but not so much in grade 10 when everybody else grew. And then got into running. I went to college, so here in Canada, and I did like okay, but I wasn't really that great. I think I graduated with a PR of 16:20 in the 5K maybe. So like decent, but not like world class. And then got into coaching. So I coached at the university level for 12 years, the high school level, post-collegiately, all the way up to athletes chasing the Olympic Games in 2021. I was fortunate enough to have a guy who missed the Olympics by about 7 seconds in the 5,000. Fortunate or unfortunate, I suppose, depending on the way you look at it.
Yeah.
And then still have one or two athletes striving for 2028. And then also coach age groupers and everybody. So my marathon PRs of people I coach right now is like 2:15 to 6 hours plus. So everything you can think of in that gambit, I coach. And I also, in my not so free time, am a mental performance coach and registered psychotherapist. So my clinical practice covers two domains, primarily performance in sport, anxiety, confidence, etc. would be kind of the big describers. And then the other piece would be disordered eating. And then I don't do it anymore, but I'm also a registered massage therapist or light LMT, I think, depending on the state you're in. So I have that designation. I've worked a little bit on the recovery side for athletes as well.
Cover all elements of the mind fuel spectrum, I would say.
I
So
try to,
you might
yeah, I
become
try
a
to.
regular here.
Yeah.
All right. So, Brant, there are so many things that we could dive into today, but one that I really wanted to spend some time talking to you about is this concept of self-perception. And that's a really broad bucket. And I think something that has stood out to me as we've been building Mindfuel is that I've had a lot of responses from people saying, well, I only run 5K a few times a week. It's just for fun. I'm not an endurance athlete, so I'm really interested in what you're building at Mindfuel, even if it's not for me. I've
Mhm.
just picked up on this perception that people have that maybe they have to be racing or doing these big distances to be considered a quote unquote endurance athlete. And personally, I disagree, but I would love from maybe both your professional and your personal standpoint to share how you define an endurance athlete and kind of what you think about that sentiment I've just described.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would think that that's a bit of a carryover from some of the more like traditional, well-known sports, like, football, basketball, baseball, right? Like if you're like 30, 40, 50 and you're playing rec league at the Y in basketball, nobody's like, I'm a basketball player, because that term generally refers to somebody like playing in the NBA, right? But I don't think that's the same in like running. Like basketball at the Y is very different than it is in the NBA. But like running a marathon is still 26.2 miles, whether you're an elite or an amateur or somebody doing it on the weekend warrior side, right? So I would say like that piece, I think we could change in sport. I do believe in the idea that like if you run, you're a runner, whether you jog, whether you're fast or you're not, like it's your practice. I think yoga probably has this the closest to being correct, where it's like my yoga practice. Like I can't bend over in half and touch, like I can't do any of that stuff. If my wife takes me to yoga, it's a joke. But like it's still my practice of yoga, even if I suck at it. I can own that. I would also say, like, psychologically speaking, it's almost like if you can remember in high school or college when you like don't prepare for a test, you're like, well, I'm not really going to do well anyway. So like, why would I prepare? So it's kind of this like hiding and protecting type thing. It's like, if I don't identify as a runner, I don't think of myself as a runner, then if I'm slow or don't reach my goal, it doesn't actually matter because I'm not actually that. And so you see kids do this all the time with tests. If they think they're going to like fail or not do well, or they have like high perfectionistic type standards, they just won't study or they'll procrastinate for something to protect themselves, to give them a reason for the potential failure they might have, right? And so I think we do that a lot as athletes. We're like, well, I'm not really a runner. It's like, well, how would you define a runner? And they're like, I don't know, somebody who's fast. It's like, well, why do they have to be fast? And I might be fast relative to some people. I got a PR at 2:46 in the marathon. My wife is 9 seconds faster. Therefore, do I suck because she's faster than I am? Am I not a runner? Like, I coach a guy who's trying to run 2:10 this year. So it's like, am I not a runner relative to him? I think sometimes we have to like blow up that idea to the absurd, right? Because at the day of filming this, I think we're 3 days removed from New York City Marathon. Is it like, what time standard on the men and women's side do we delineate all of a sudden? 25th on the women's side ran, I don't know, probably 2:28 or 2:29 or something. It's like, after that, nobody else is runners. So the other 20,000 women that ran just aren't runners. And so when we blow that example up to a bigger, kind of population size, we see that it's absurd. But I think it's a protectionistic type mechanism that we use sometimes to not feel like we're letting ourselves down, or to set this giant like expectation or feeling that we may or may not be able to hit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that analogy to a yoga practice. We need to own it. And I think this is where, even at the beginning, I said, I asked who you are, not what do you do initially, because trying to disassociate the what we do from our identity. And I think this concept of being an endurance athlete or being a runner can become really tied up in our identity in a way that maybe doesn't serve us. And just the practice of running can have so many other benefits, simply meditation, a way to move the body, a way to get away from the stress of the laptop or the kids. And it's really important that we each hold on to what it means for us and try not to care about what anyone else thinks about what we've defined as good for
Yeah,
us.
absolutely.
Another thing that's come up, and I brought this up when I first met you, and it caused a little bit of controversy between us, which I'd love to dig into, is
Sure,
I've
go
got a
for it.
bit of a hot opinion on Ironman in the
Okay.
triathlon world, which is that I think the brand has been great for the sport overall. I think it's grown a ton of awareness for triathlon, a lot of interest in the sport. But I also think it's been damaging for many athletes because now it's become like doing this full distance race. And for those who might not know the distances of an Ironman, it is a 3.8 kilometer swim, a 180K cycle, and a full marathon. So 42.2 Ks of running consecutively. And my perception is that there's sort of this world in which now people think, oh, I haven't done a triathlon until I've done a full Ironman, or that this race has become almost like the midlife crisis coping mechanism, much like drugs or alcohol could be. But as society, we celebrate, wow, they went and did, an Ironman versus, ooh, I think they need to drink less. And this distance can be a little bit unhealthy. But when I asked you for your thoughts, you disagreed with some of that. So enlighten us, tell us more about why. And then I want to get into a little bit of this discussion around the ultra endurance world.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll come back with a couple of questions that are somewhat rhetorical, but I would say first we need to define damaging. And so I would look at that and say, well, it has to be relative to what the other options are, right? So like, as an example, being in a car accident is quite damaging, right? But like relative to all the other things that would happen if you didn't drive because you were scared of getting in a car accident, like you'd be late for work, you have to rely on public transit that might not exist, you get rained on, you show up wet, everything that could happen because you don't have a car. It's like, well, of course, getting in a car accident is more damaging in a singular bout potentially, right? So we have to define damaging well. I would also say, I think you could say the same, and maybe this is part of your argument, we'll see, but you would also then have to apply the exact same logic to every other endurance sport, because you could think of the same as trail, right? Well, I did a 50K, but that's not really an ultra, right? Or I didn't do hard rock, right? I didn't get into UTMB. So like, it's not really the same. And it's like, well, all those are big multi-hour events too, right? I could also argue that the marathon is equally damaging if you're underprepared as the Ironman is. And so I think anything that is providing a net positive is something we should explore. So I think like we have to take it down to like first principles and go, okay, what is the harm that we're perceiving relative to what the harm is that could be there if not pursuing it. So you use the example of like drugs and alcohol. And I'm not saying everybody who does Ironman would be desolate and, addicted to drugs or alcohol, right? But for a lot of people, it is their coping mechanism to have a great life, to strive for purpose. And so if we look at positive psychology, one of the things that we know that drives people is purpose. So like a lot of people who don't have purpose, we would tend to find lower socioeconomic or more struggling with mental health. And so if somebody has a purpose, let's say it's Ironman, and we can decide the merits of whether that's healthy or not, or discuss maybe, I don't think we're the executors of that decision, but we can discuss that, right? It's like, well, if that's the purpose that makes them a good employee to bring home money so they can provide for their families and be a good mom or dad and do a lot of great things and be healthy to increase their health span. So, well, I don't know if that's damaging or bad. So I've spoken a lot, so feel free to push me back and tell me where I'm wrong.
No, I think they're all really good points. And where I think you're going is that we have to be making these decisions quite consciously. And
Sure.
so, in your role as a coach and as a sports psychologist, how do you actually help guide your athletes to choose the right distance or the least damaging, or considering all of those factors? It's not maybe just about the physical state that they're in and their capability to do the race, is what I'm hearing. So, how do you support athletes with that?
Well, I think first you have to understand the actual demands of the event too, and then where it's at in a yearly or 4-year type training plan, like how it fits longitudinally. I would say what's good for you in the long term is also what's good for you in the short term for training. So I'll have athletes who come like, I want to do X race, X marathon or whatever. And so maybe it's too early. And so let's just say, I'm not saying this is true, but let's say as an example that a requisite to run a marathon is 25 miles a week. So it's like, well, if they're not there, I'm still going to train them from where they're at and keep progressing the next logical step along the way, because I'd rather them get, let's say, 12, 16 weeks of healthy running and then do a marathon and then maybe be laid off for a week or two afterwards. I'm still looking at a positive of 12 to 14 weeks of net good behavior and exercise, right? Versus if we go, okay, well, you have to run, I have a video on this with the need to run a 20 miler in a marathon build. And it's like, well, you don't need to. So it's like, well, if you think that way, then all of a sudden you're training to the event rather than training to the person. So I would look at it and go, I actually don't care whether you're doing a 70.3 or a full or an Olympic or a marathon or half marathon or 100K. I'm training you for where you're at. There's no plan to make you run 3 hours in the marathon. There's no plan to make you have the best Ironman. It's training you to where you are now, finding the next logical step, and then closing that gap in the safest way possible. So a lot of athletes, I think, go into these bigger events, and this might be where you're coming at from your angle, where they actually think, I must do X to perform at Y. And then they chase that, and then they end up injured, burnt out, fried, hating the sport. And so I think the inverse is actually true. You train the athlete, not the event, because at the end of the day, physiology doesn't care that you're doing an Ironman or a 70.3 or whatever. Physiology cares about where you were yesterday and then getting better. So that's the position I would frame it in when I'm coaching athletes, is like, obviously there's things we got to do. If you're doing an Ironman, you got to swim, bike, run. You're not just going to do running for 12 weeks because you're screwed, right? But it's like, it doesn't matter that you haven't swam 3.9K or biked 180K, because at the end of the day, if we can get you there healthy, that's like 95% of the battle, especially for most people who are, it's their first one. It's like, let's just go have a great experience training and hopefully have a pretty good experience in the race. But in an Ironman, you can do everything right and still have a horrible day. That's the beauty of the event. It actually doesn't matter. And
Well,
so,
welcome to endurance sports.
yeah, exactly. I think if you treat it that way, you increase the likelihood of not just in that one event, but longitudinally success. And if I'm being honest, I actually generally don't care how well people do in their first event, because nobody ever in the history of endurance sport has been like, my first race was my best one, and that's the one that is like my fastest and best, right? It's like, no, you got to be in this for years. So that's
True,
why I
but
coach that way.
interestingly, I think a lot of people, probably myself included, would say many times I have felt almost the best in my first race because I really raced my race, because I wasn't there to necessarily get a certain time, or I knew that I needed to listen to how my body felt because I didn't know how this whole thing was going to feel. So I needed to be super in tune throughout. And the more I've gotten in my head, I'll only speak for myself, but I
Yeah.
imagine this applies to others, as I've continued with certain endeavors athletically, then the more I've had some races that I have not performed well and felt terrible because I've put this strong either data bent on it or the goal about that specific race and just not listen to my body.
So I would argue that that is a you, like the person problem, not a sport problem. And so what I would say is the first time when people go into major events like this, it's a completionist type mindset typically. So when you set the expectation as completion, right? Anything above that is gravy. Like if you and I were in the same town and I was like, hey, thanks for taking me on your podcast. I'm going to take you out for dinner. Tell me your favorite restaurant. I tell you, I'm going to book that restaurant. It's going to be great. We could catch up after and discuss the podcast. And so this whole time prepping, like, this will be awesome. This will be a great chat. And I get to go to dinner. I drop the ball and I forget to do that. And so I just go, I'm just going to take her to this other restaurant. Well, all of a sudden there's this expectation gap problem where you've had this expectation. And because it's not met, all of a sudden you're down here. The food could be equally great. It's just you like that one better. So you perceive it as lesser, right? So that's what happens the first time people race is they go, I just want to complete an Ironman or a marathon or whatever it is, right? And then all of a sudden they go, you know what? I've read a lot that it would be really cool to hit X time. So then they start training for X time rather than training for where their body actually is. So they start over pressing because I got to hit X time. And if I got to hit X time, then I got to do this on the bike and this on the run and this on the swim. So then they train to that. So it's not actually not listening on the day. It's setting up a massive expectation gap problem because you actually attacked it from the beginning with the outcome in mind versus the process. Versus the first time, it's like, well, I got to figure out how to train for this thing. So I'm going to start to enjoy it and you get the novelty. So we as athletes set up that expectation gap for failure more often than not on our subsequent races.
That's such a good point. So how do you as a coach help close that expectation gap?
Yeah, if any of my athletes are listening, they're probably sick of the emails that I send about asking how they're feeling every day. I get all their quantitative data, right? And it's like that tells a story, but I want to know how you're feeling because if you felt like you were pressing or you felt like it was too hard because you're striving for that number, I want to catch that early in training. And then also designing sessions that are like mini testers. So like for the marathon, for an example, right? About 3 to 4 weeks, depending on how the build has gone, I'll always do 90 to 100 minutes at marathon pace. So depending on your pace, that's anywhere from like 17 to 25-ish K on the elite end. And so 10 miles to 15 miles, 16 miles. And so, I'd rather find out 4 weeks before that the pace that you've thought you've been training for is not attainable and you have a rough go there than finding out at 14 miles in the marathon and having the worst day ever. So part of that as a coach is like, well, we got to know when to test that. And so what I find a lot of athletes do is they pull the carrots up too early to see if they're ready in the build. They're constantly testing all the time as a self-proof that I'm there. I swam X 400 in this time. I biked this 30K at that power. I ran this at this pace, but most of the tests are actually not helpful. And so you got to check in on feeling and you have to understand that there's a time to pull the carrots up and see if they're ready. And then we make racing goals off of what the data from training tells us, not the inverse.
And how, if the athlete's still pushing to say, oh, but my really goal when I came in to this was X, and you're like, we are at Y. How do you get them there gently or not?
Yeah. So I describe it as, okay, you have a timeline problem then. So it's like, if you want to run, let's just say 3.5 hours, right? That's a pretty solid like women's time for most age groupers, right? So if you want to run 3:30 and we're in our first build together, right? But all of my data is pointing towards 3:45 or 3:50, like 15, 20 minutes off, right? Well, that's what the data is telling us. So we'll do that 90 to 100 minutes. Let's say you have a good one because you paced it at 3:45 and you felt amazing. You're like, yeah, I could do that for another hour and a half, 2 hours. Perfect. Okay, we're in the right zone. Or let's say you bomb it and you drop out at like 65 minutes because you went at 3:30 pace and it was like really hard. And you're in your head going, there's no way I can keep that for a marathon. I was like, well, that's kind of the answer that we needed. But I would look at it and go, okay, it's not that you can't do it. It's that you can't do it in the timeline that's arbitrary that you've put forward.
How much does comparison start in your experience to play a role here, particularly when we think about the role that social media may be playing in people's perception of what they can do or what they should do?
Well, I think first off, like the thing we all know about social media is it's the curated best parts of life. We have to recognize it for what it actually is. It's people pumping their own tires, which is great. I think we should all celebrate our successes and wins and all that stuff. But if you actually look at daily life, let's say you work and have kids, percent of your life is putting out fires. Maybe 20% on a good day is actually fun stuff. Nobody posts the 80%. But like, look at a marathon build. Let's say 12 weeks. Let's say on average, you're running 35 miles a week. So that's, I don't know, 400 miles, let's say, right across the build. The idea that all 400 of those are great, right? That's like the 20 that were good made it on Instagram posts. And so you're looking at the 1% or 5% of stuff that went well, right? And so I would also look at it from a comparison perspective. And so let's say, I always use this example because my wife and I's PRs are like 9 seconds apart.
Incredible.
Yeah, hers is faster, to be clear, and I love it. But I ran my marathon off 35 miles a week, give or take, and another 5-6 hours of cross training. She needed about 110 miles a week to do it on Chicago, and I did it on Mississauga, a much slower course. We're
Wow.
9 seconds apart. If I compared myself to her, I'd be a failure. She had a faster course, can run more, do all these things. If she compared herself to me, she'd also be a failure. We have literally the same time down to 9 seconds. It's like 0.12 seconds per mile difference, right? And so if I'm comparing myself to her or she's comparing herself to me, we live in the same house, we're married, we ran the exact same time, right? We'd both be failing. And then I think most of the influencers and such that we see are doing some form of performance enhancing drugs. I am mostly convinced of
Oh,
that. Like those things happen in sport. And if you're going to compare yourself, at least pick the right part of the population to compare to if you must compare yourself. Like if you're a 39-year-old mom who's getting into a running practice and trying to be good, don't compare yourself to like the 228 elites that you're seeing on Instagram.
life revolves
It's their whole
around training.
job, right? And so it's like, okay, don't compare to that. So it's like, okay, find the mom talk, so to speak, of Instagram runners. Maybe compare there, but probably not. I would look at it and go, who were you yesterday? Who were you last week? Who were you last month, last year? And compare to that. Because all we care about is your directionality up and to the right, positive. I don't care that so-and-so's is great. That's good for
No,
them.
it's
I also
irrelevant.
don't want their life. So
Yeah,
I'm going to
exactly.
look at it, right? So if you don't want their life, don't take the running part out of it or triathlon or endurance
Yeah,
part out of it.
great advice. All right. Time to wrap this up. So if you could leave us with one final thought today, I'll leave that very vague for you.
Oof.
What would you say to our athletes?
I would say I'll pull from like a lot that I see in my clinical practice because that seems to be like a hot topic and hope that it resonates with a bunch of people. First, you are not your thoughts. So like the voice in your head isn't you. You're the one hearing it. And then the second piece I would add to that I see kind of go hand in hand would be a lot of us think that our thoughts are weird or abnormal or like there's something off with us, right? I get the power of seeing in a lot of brains every week when I talk to athletes. You're more normal than you think you are, trust me. But also look at it and go, your uniqueness is specifically your advantage. So your edge, the reason why you get out of bed, the reason why you do it, the reason why the moms that I coach at 4:30 in the morning are out on the friggin' treadmill in the garage chasing themselves, that uniqueness is their edge. So the goal isn't to copy, to go back to that comparison piece. The goal isn't to copy someone else's formula, but rather to find yours that works. And so you might want to take pieces from people's formula that works, but you don't want to copy theirs. We're people that have lives and different things going on and experiences and backgrounds. And lean into your unique edge, not someone else's formula.
Great advice and part of the mission here, giving people the tools to take what they want when they need it and craft their own journey with sport and with mindfulness. Thank you for all of these messages of wisdom today. I learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers did too. As we said at the beginning, you do both physical coaching and mental coaching, so have a lot to offer. So how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to either work with you or just learn more or follow you?
Yeah. So if you want to work with me, whether it's run coaching or mental performance and or disordered eating, if you go to my website, so it's www.runfastandfree.com, there's access to my calendar there. You can book an appointment with my admin team to chat. If you want to follow some of the stuff I'm talking about or sharing, you can follow me on LinkedIn. My name, Brant Stachel. My Instagram is Fast and Free Coaching. And then we also have a YouTube channel where I'm providing some tools and tips for athletes, which is Fast and Free Coaching as well.
Awesome. I've been following Brant for a few months now and highly recommend that you all do too. Lots of good stuff coming out of his social channels. So a final thank you to all of you for watching and joining us today, listening to us. If this resonated for you, I ask that you please like and subscribe. Any follow-up comments or questions you can put down below or email us at connect@mindfuel.fit. And if you haven't already, check out the other videos on the YouTube or listen on Spotify and head over to our website, mindfuel.fit, to subscribe to our email and check out the rest of the resources that we have there. Thanks again and happy and healthy training.